Hello, I am Jan from Prague, the Czech Republic, and this is a quick tour through the key settings of Canon R50, or pretty much any camera of that sort. Many people just buy their cameras and then they are somehow disappointed because the photos are not as exciting as it should be. And that's the reason why I decided to create that video, which basically sums up the key settings you should concentrate on. If you ask me which function would I take to an empty island in the middle of sea, I would definitely say exposure compensation. It is something you probably know, but it's nearly impossible not to start with that. It's basically what I am doing now, so I just hit this plus-minus sign and it gives me the chance to tell the camera, well, I'd like it to be darker or lighter. The truth is that you probably need to use it maybe in 8 times out of 10 shots you take. And the reason is that your camera is basically, sorry to say, silly, and it just does not know that, for instance, I would like the label of this wine to be darker or lighter than the camera thinks it's correct. So if you can see, I can just adjust the level of how it feels, how it looks, and you simply have to admit, you have to understand that you just can't let the camera to do whatever it wants. So again, the key control would always be that way of telling your camera, sorry, I would like it to be darker or lighter. When we just turn back to the settings, in case of R50, you have to be careful that the plus-minus sign here actually works as well as a switch between in this case, aperture. If I just hit it, and I can, by touching this dial, I can change aperture, and what we want to use at the moment, it means the exposure compensation. Right, so this is the simple, most important function of any camera. Then we have extremely important set of settings, which are all connected to focusing. And if I just hit set Q here, you see that basically we would always be moving in 3 key settings connected to that amazing stuff. And please just do not forget really to pay a lot of attention to these details, because they can really help you a lot, and on the contrary, it would be really pity just to miss them. So maybe we can start with that setting here, which actually determines, as you can see, subject to detect. And it's one of the key things which did not really work for many years, and now they define the new generations of cameras, so they really make our life much easier. And as you can see, I can switch here between detecting people, animals, or cars, or trains, or pretty much everything which is move. And it is just important to know that there's a slight difference between this auto, which basically picks up whatever it wants, and people. Because turning on people actually means that the people should be prioritized. That if you have a group of trains and cats and people, and you want people to be focused, then you should hit people, which I think is a default setting as well. Then let me just go here, choose an autofocus area. Again, it's quite important, but I think it's reasonably straightforward. If you can see that if I just move there and back, it gives me the option to select the shape and behavior of the zones. You can see we have a couple of options like spot AF, 1 point AF, then we can play with different areas, or we can even use these flexible zones here. By the way, the size of these zones can be changed. As you can see here, if I just hit that AF button and then I use these arrows, I can not only change the position but shape of it as well. Again, I don't think this is somehow crucial, but since this is just a overview of the key settings which might be useful, we just should not omit it. And so once again, here we can define the shape and the behavior of the zones. Again, I don't think you should pay much attention to that at the beginning. Frankly, I am using quite often Spot AF, the very basic thing, and then if I would be shooting some sports or, well, thing which a lot of movement, I would just turn to these flexible zones and define, or even to whole area AF, where the autofocus is basically able to catch anything anywhere. Now, what is extremely important to understand at the very, very, very beginning is the difference between these three things. AF operations. What does this mean? It means that if I have one shot, it behaves pretty much in the very traditional way we would be using before. So if I just press the shutter button halfway, it just gets focused, you know, and even if I move, it is still focused. I'm still holding my fingers on the shutter button and it just does not change. If I now release it and press again, then the camera still keeps the level of sharpness, the level of focus. So I just hit it and it's locked and I can move and do whatever I want. I am pretty much sure that you know that and you just would be using this very often. Now, the key thing is the other option called servo. And it does extremely useful thing. That it means that you can just target whatever you want. And now if the bird starts flying towards me, he would still be sharp and focused. It means that servo, as the name suggests, actually means that if we are trying to take shots of something which is moving, that would just help us incredibly. Because if you would be taking shots of a kid or running through the beach, or a fish, or pretty much anything which is moving, a train, bus, car, using that servo or continuous autofocus is just absolutely essential. So, and my advice would even be that you could probably forget about the one-shot option. It was the key thing many, many years ago among the older generations of cameras, but now the technology has just jumped so much that I think that in future we would just be primarily using servo, because in combination with the detection and other technical miracles, we can do a lot of stuff. Also, you might ask what actually artificial intelligent focus means. It's something in between. And in that option, the camera is just trying to determine what would be the best combination to use. My advice would be not to use it too much, because frankly, it does not work well. And sometimes when you are focusing and you just move a little bit, it switch the mode from servo to one shot, and it's a lot of confusion. So I would really primarily be using servo and playing with it in the combination with, as we already mentioned, all these fancy focusing areas and detections. One more important point is that until now we're hitting this Q, quick command, quick control button, which is very useful. But also we should mention that we have a special button here which defines the movement and the behavior of the autofocusing points and systems. So if I just hit it, you see that I have some nice hints here. One of the hints is that if I press menu, the focusing point should jump to the center. You see that quite often the focusing points are just forgotten somewhere. And now if I hit, as this suggests, menu button, did you see it? It just jumped to the very center, which could be quite useful because frankly, especially in that case of this camera, which does not have really fancy commands like another cameras, it's very useful. If you are not using that camera, it means R50, and you have some maybe less or more expensive, the system would still be there, but you might be able to operate the focusing points in some more direct way, like that you would have a joystick like R10 or obviously R6 Mark II or anything. But again, you should be able to find also some other ways how to get to the focusing points. So once again, if I hit it, I have menu, and now also I have that very useful ISO button. We'll get to ISO as such soon, but now let's just hit ISO, and you can see that this is actually the very quick way to play again with these key settings. So if I hit these two buttons, I have this very nice way of selecting the area for focusing. And there is one more function which is extremely important. And if you ask me which of these things I'm just trying to show you in that short review and video, you should never forget and you should just put to your diaries, is that little function here. So I hit AF button, then ISO, and there is this info thing. And if I turn on and turn off, you can see it's there. You can very easily overlook it. If it's off, what basically is happening that the position of the focusing point is fixed. So it's basically at the center in my case, and even if I move, it's still in the center. It could be useful, but generally this is not what we want to have. And now, and if I hit info, so I turn it on, look what is happening here. What is happening is that if I press the shutter button halfways, it gets locked. And even if I move it, so until I keep my finger on it, it is still there. And this is so important because as I mentioned, one of the compromises of this camera is that it does not have that fancy sets of buttons and joystick like more expensive ones, but still we want to do a good job with focusing and working in hard conditions, and that is just what extremely helps us, because as you can see, by the way, you see the detection, the eye detection is able to find even the fish eyes and keep it focused. You see, it's just really amazing. And the most important usage of that would be in the case of where would be you taking photos, a lot of people, and you would like to have a great focus, and you would just hit the face of the animal or a person with that focusing point, press the shutter button halfways, and you are set. And you can actually do a lot of good stuff with that. And again, I repeat, for me, a part of compensation, by the way, you might have seen that I thought it was too dark, so I just, when talking, just hit the exposure compensation, even without telling you. But just back to this, my thought. A part of exposure compensation, the ability to play with the focusing system is just something which is extremely important. And please do not forget, just right after you buy this camera, or pretty much any camera, you would like to really find your way towards it and know how it all works. Okay, so if we now turn to another important topic. I should probably have started with that, but I did not. What I mean is that the question is, which of the modes should we be using? And when I speak about modes, I mean all these little strange letters and signs here at the top of the camera on the mode dial. Well, why I did not start with that is that what I am going to tell you might sound a little bit weird, but it's not. But what I'd like to say is that please do not use these automatic things. Especially do not use this Scene Intelligent Auto. It basically pretends it is intelligent. It will work in many circumstances, but generally speaking, this just should be avoided because it just does not do a great job. Again, it would probably take 5 or up to 10 minutes to explain to you on very concrete examples why this is not a good idea to use it. But let's not do that. But just trust me that if you really want to have a great photos with any great camera of your choice, then please do stay within the realm of these 3 options. Please do use program, it means program which is here, or shutter priority, or which I think honestly to be the best option for any situation, or pretty much any situation, is aperture priority. Or obviously, if you'd like to just move ahead, it's very important to be able to use manual exposure as well. It's actually much easier than you think, perhaps, but for the beginning, I suggest you either stick to P for the first tests, or eventually you start right away with aperture priority. And again, we won't go into details here, but just do invest a little bit of energy into understanding how that all works. It's really very important. If I go here again, you have some opportunities, you have some options. You see that you can do some stuff. You can, correct the brightness as we did with the exposure compensation. So you can do some decent stuff here and you can help your photos. But again, frankly, this is too much energy you would need to invest into understanding how all that works. That again, my advice would be stay away from that as far as you can. If you just move on the dial, there is something called scenes. And as you can see very briefly, there are just many options which are like prepared for the usage. It looks actually tempting. Well, you can do portraits or group shots, or well, you can shoot sports, whatever. Again, I would not be that radical. I would not tell you never use this. Well, I would actually love to do so. My underlying thought is that you should really stay away from that as well. But especially when you are just beginning, it might help you. What you might not want to hear is the cruel fact that, again, these shots, if you would be using that way of approach to your camera, would be worse than if you just stick and master these simple letters like P, TV, or AV, like aperture priority. Why? Again, just in one sentence. If you, for instance, use sports preset for shooting subjects in motion, as it says, it won't do any harm if you do use it, well, say, in bright sunshine. But if you would be taking shots of somebody running just before the sunset, or just before the night comes, you would be in trouble, because, just to put it very simply, the camera is really silly and it does not know how quick the movement would be. And its only option to save you is to push up ISO speed to levels which you would not probably use when you set it manually. Please, well, okay, I just do not want you to be stressed now, but if you can just remember one key sentence. If you are just starting, please do use this, but try to leave as quickly as you can, because again, the results would not be that good as it should be. And by the way, there are some functions which might be worth exploring. One of them would be panoramic shot, which, well, could be really good. Or if you just very quickly want to make your camera silent, you can just turn silent shutter. But again, just be advised that you can find the same setting in your camera, and it's actually quite useful to do it very quickly. So I hope I stressed you enough, and I do indeed believe that you just won't be using that too much, and that you will trust my key sentence that it's always better to be the commander of your camera and not allow the camera to command you too much. Then we have creative filters. Please do stay away from them. It just does not look nice. It's simply like if you're playing with you know, toys and soft focuses. I just don't think it's worth exploring that. And if you want to do some wild stuff like that, you can always do it in post-processing. Camera. I won't be going into details into how to make videos with that particular camera, because I'm not a big expert in the area of video, so I can't give you as exact and as precise advice like in the case of still photography, but I'm sure that you can figure it out quite quickly again how it works. And now, if we just sum it up, please do try to understand how these basic things operate. And do try to start right away, maybe with the program. It's not bad at all. And how it basically works is that you have three key settings. You have three key parameters of which are here for centuries basically, which is exposure time, which is aperture, and which is ISO. We don't really have time nor energy to play with this now because it's a very quick tour. But if you can note one important sentence, please do invest some energy into exploring what these things actually mean. That, well, the time defines if the photo would be blurred or not. It's simply the definition of time, exposure time or shutter speed means that if something gets blurred, especially during movement, the time was just too long. It's just one of these logics which would apply. Then we have this F thing, which is aperture. And it's useful for very important thing when you just want to keep the background blurred. And again, the key rule is that if you want to have the background blurred, you should keep the aperture level down. Okay. And the third one would be ISO, which actually brings us to another chapter of what is useful to know and operate. We have now the set of another buttons, and one of them would be ISO, and it's like here, ISO speed actually means sensitivity, and higher the speed would be, the more quick movements you are able to shoot. But if I use that high ISO, as you can see, there would be some compromise when using that high ISO, which is called noise. And if you just, see those details, you see that especially in the dark parts, there would be some noise and the quality of photos would not be that great. I just do not want you to get confused now. So please do forget what I have just said. Or maybe do not forget, but just the key crucial point here is do invest some of your time into investigating what ISO means, what shutter speed is, what aperture is, and how to operate them. Because I can guarantee, and this is the key point, I can really promise you that if you do invest, your photos would just be much, much, much nicer. If we now go back to the key settings, again, if I hit Q, we already covered these three key things connected to focusing. Then we have a couple of other things which are extremely useful, although not that quite often. One of them would be image quality. And here my advice is very simple. Just never touch anything right of that big L with the big belly. Just once forever, just push it to the L, and that's it. It basically tells us how big the photo is, and there is not even a single reason why it should not be the L, because you just want to get the JPEG in the highest possible quality. Then what really is important, and you can include it into your homework just to find out a little bit more about that, is something called RAW. And you can see that the camera suggests that if I hit Info, I can ask the camera to include RAW files into what we get to our card when shooting. Basically what it means that RAW is the big version of your JPEG. So if I now take a RAW, now, as you could have seen, the photo was taken in RAW. So a part of JPEG, which would have, well, these 5 megabytes, the RAW would have probably 20, 30. So it would have much more data. And that's actually why it is useful to use it. If you are just beginning, just do note that RAW might be useful in two situations. First would be that it would be somewhere which is so exciting and it'd be just valuable to keep the really big file. The second situation, which actually might apply to what we have here, because you can see the light has moved, the sunshine has actually changed the light here on our table. So you see that there are big differences between the light and the darks and lights, and this is the situation when RAW can really be useful, because it gives you the option, as the data are much bigger, to do the adjustments much more easily. So again, this is a RAW, and again, you might not need it at the very beginning of your photography journey, but it's good to note that it does exist and that it's useful. Some more settings. Then we have metering mode, and my advice here would be quite simple: just do keep that in that basic settings. It basically tells the camera, or well, you tell camera by setting that, how should it measure the light it goes to it and how to adjust all these exposures and things like this. But again, if you are just beginning, you won't make any harm if you just keep it to these default measurements and the default options. The same applies to a white balance. You can see that if I just change the setting here, it really does change a lot. We have a very different touch and feel of the light, and again, you can play with this, but my advice for the first 2 years would be just use automatic white balance as it is here, and you'll be quite happy, I'm sure. Why should we be careful? Because if you just play with this and leave it somewhere here, then your JPEGs just would be ruined. So this is one of the very dangerous settings for beginners, because please do try to know what you have there, and the auto white balance would be good in many situations. You can play with these other options, but again, I think you can stick with AWB. One more quite important settings is here. It's called picture style. Again, at the very beginning, you might just want to know how it works. It is basically a sort of pre-filter. By selecting one of these options, you basically tell your camera whether it should use some features like that. It would just add a little bit of higher saturation for landscape, which I am actually using quite often when I am in, which is not now because we have nice spring here, but if there would be a November and the greens would be sort of dull, I would just use this. Once again, it gives us our JPEGs, not the RAW, some basic editings even before we take it away from camera. So again, but do not forget that it can ruin your shot if you forget something which you do not want to use in another options. So these are the key settings, and one more setting which is again here on the back side is how do we define the speed of shooting. And it's quite often overlooked, which is pity. Single shooting means that I just press the shutter button and it's there. My advice would be to have low speed continuous, because it gives you the option that I can shoot one by one, or if I just push it, it just does the series. So that, again, that would be my choice for most of the situations. But at the same time, please do not forget that you have these amazing options like high speed shooting, which could be up to 15 shots per second, which is just amazing, especially in the combination with autofocusing systems. So that is basically what I believe you should know when you want to start using your camera and just love it and have nice photos. One more short theoretical note is, as I suggested, please just do note that you will not be able to use your camera without understanding the concept of time, concept of aperture and its ability to blur the background and give you a nice bokeh, and understanding what ISO is. Do not try to avoid that. Just do invest those 2 days maximum to understanding how it all works, because it will just give you much better photos. The reason why you can't live without that is very simple. Your camera is silly, sorry to say so, and it is not able to find the best solution in many situations, and you should always be there to help. So this is one of the key closing remarks to that brief, quick introduction to pretty much any cameras. So I wish you good luck and take care.